What's going on, everybody? Tuesday morning, we are live with Dual Coast Podcast, joined by a very special guest here, Patrick Hogan. Patrick, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We got my co-host, obviously, out on his wharf in California.
Oh, yeah. Let's go.
Sun rising. Russ,
Bringing the outdoors inside.
please do.
Beautiful.
How we doing over there, Russ?
You know what? Like I was telling you guys before the show, it's a beautiful morning, man. And the sun is going to be coming up soon. And it is just going to be stunning because we have foggy mornings all in June. Almost said July. In June, we get this June gloom. But today it is going to be beautiful. It's clear. No sea life, but a lot of birds around. So I know this is right down Patrick's alley because he is Mr. Outdoors. He is Mr. Movement. He is weird in his movement. He loves cold water, probably not cold enough, and infusing himself with interjecting outdoor lifestyle. And we're excited about having you on the show, Patrick, because you bring a little bit of variance to anybody that we've had. With regards to movement. I was watching some of your posts last week, and it's so cool because like I see you going down this stream, and then all of a sudden you're in this basically like a hot tub, but it's a cold bath, and it's just a river, and you're just frolicking 100%. Around, and you're just like, woo, this is cold, man. But I love what you do. I love your movement. I love, and something that you said off air that really connects with me, and that's the key word, is connection. You talked about running and how you're going to get together with people. And I know this isn't something that we discuss and everything, but I want to talk about connectivity. I want to talk about you, Patrick, in a way of how you are and ways, because I think you like to do a little bit more of the solo thing, but now you're integrating connectivity into movement, infusing that into your lifestyle. Tell us how you're doing it and the importance of connection and movement.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, again, thanks again for having me on. And yeah, it's, let's say there's importance between connectivity and movement, and they're both essential. You could almost say nutrients. Like if you think about a movement diet, I'm a student of Katie Bowman's in a way, and one of her things that she talks about is like movement is very akin to our diet, in metaphorically, like it's something that we need for our bodies to functionally work, to be healthy. And without a balanced diet, you get certain disorders or dysfunction and all that kind of stuff. And so same thing with movement. You need a whole balanced diet of movement. We need all sorts of varieties of movement in order to make our bodies work very well. But you can extrapolate that even farther. Another part of our whole life diet is community. We are, communal animals. And so we need a sense of connection, community, in order to find optimal health.
Yeah.
And, and I think it's really on an individual basis as far as like where movement fits into connectivity. I have in my past, in my life, throughout my life, yet as you mentioned, kind of gravitated towards a lot of solo activities, because that's where I find, my solace, my
Yes.
thinking time, my ability just to explore and play on my own. To me, that recharges my batteries and really refreshes my mind. But sometimes you start to find like, okay, it's a little bit imbalanced. Maybe I'm not connecting with people the way I need. And so that's my latest endeavors are kind of looking outward and going, okay, where are these other groups? And maybe I can give them a chance and see what it's like. And
Sure.
I was just mentioning before, like I explored joining this running group that's in a nearby town here. And I find that it's a very different type of running. Like I got out there and as I was running, I was realizing, back in my childhood, I used to run with a group. It was a bunch of like all parents and kids all running together, and it was kind of a beautiful thing that we used to do out in the Northwest in the Pacific Northwest in Washington State. And now I'm in New York State, and so it's kind of a little bit of a different scene. But I find that like when I'm running with a group, it's just about the community and less about the running. For me,
Yeah.
and when I'm by my own, I get into like the meditative state of running, and so they're like very different experiences,
Yeah.
To state the obvious.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, I just think, do we need to find a balance in that? Or, is it okay to be 70-30, 70 solace, 30 integrated in community? I mean, do we really need to have, a balance in there? Is that important? Because, when we're out exercising, I love to go walks on my own. Sometimes I just don't want to talk. Right.
Yeah.
I've been talking all day. Now it's time to set aside that time for myself. So recharging on your own, I totally get, but does it really need to be a 50-50 balance?
I don't think so. Not at
Yeah.
all. I think the balance is more in accord with your particular, I use this term a lot. It's just finding your own true nature. What is making you healthy? I mean, and so I'll go back to like the diet metaphor. You don't need 50-50 of every type of carbohydrate to protein to, there's different percentages. And same thing, I think, in life, in all these other categories of our life, like community versus movement versus family life versus work life, leisure time. It doesn't all have to be the same and equal, but we have to keep experimenting, what fills you up to the right extent, when, and by balance, it's less trying to equalize everything, and it's more like where you are feeling for yourself most fulfilled or stable or energized. Introverts versus extroverts. Like introverts are not going to get that recharge by being in lots of crowds, where an extrovert might.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
Freaking out, man.
Exactly.
Oh man.
It's like creating your own equilibrium is what you want, is like
what
you want to do. You create your own equilibrium out of it, like how you see balance, how you visualize balance in your own life.
Exactly. And I think that changes at different times of your life,
Sure,
even different times of the day, and we have to be, I think what the problem comes when we start to make rigid rules about it, and we start to get kind of rigid in our thinking that say it has to be this or this. And instead, I think we need a little bit more of a flexibility in continually just checking in with ourselves, checking in with our internal body compass, and feeling for what we need at a certain time in our life. And so, maybe it's larger periods of life, like, when you're, raising a family, you might not be doing other social activities as much as,
Sure.
Other times in your life when you might be looking for, maybe you're building a business and you're like really focused on that.
Yeah.
And we have to just keep checking back in. I didn't keep using that word, but keep checking back in with ourselves and saying, okay, what do I need now? Where am I? What are my values and goals now?
Yeah.
Sure.
And that's going to change.
It will. Yeah. No, connection with others, connection with self.
Yeah.
Really understanding who we are
and
as an
always
individual.
A back and forth there, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. That's very interesting.
Love the answer.
And I feel like it does change very dramatically sometimes, just on the drop of a dime, because you can have a focus one day on 1 week and be on, maybe a topic of developing the business, but the next week you're like, I really got to focus on my health. My health has been slacking. I got to make a shift. And you kind of like, you gauge yourself in that way. I feel like that could change dramatically very quickly.
Yeah. And I think that's an important topic to like bring up is very often most people get unbalanced because they're, and I think it's a, an innate thing in a lot of people is we're very resistant to change.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the thing is when things need to change, most of us, we like to cling on to what was or what we knew or what's predictable. And very often life isn't predictable anymore, you
Yeah.
know,
Very good.
and that's what I was really, what really drew me into eventually becoming a life coach as well as a movement coach is in the life coaching realm, we're helping people navigate change, saying, okay, what stage of change are you in and how do you actually, and I love that, Russ, that you're out on the beach because I like to use the metaphor. It's like, are you actually being pummeled by these waves or can you surf them?
Mm-hmm.
You know, can you learn how to ride that out?
Love that.
I like that a lot. Yeah, I like that a lot. Patrick, so, we have a lot of guests on who focus on exercise and the gym routines and everything like that, but there's a big difference between movement and exercise, as you like to say. So, you promote a movement-rich lifestyle. You do a lot of things. You get outdoors. You get, into the cold plunges, into the rivers. What would you say the big difference is between movement and exercise and building this movement-rich lifestyle in contrast with going to the gym or developing a running routine? What would you say the difference is between those two?
Yeah, I'd say the main difference is it's just broadening our scope and capacity for seeing like what is exercise and what is movement. Um, exercise is actually kind of a recent invention, at least the way that we think about it, whereas movement is something that human beings evolved doing. All animals, all biological life evolved through movement in some way.
Sure.
And we evolved moving, in accord with the environment that we lived in, so our bodies are shaped in order to do certain types of movements that actually helped us thrive as a species, so we evolved to do all these categories of motion of like running and walking and carrying and lifting and climbing and fighting and swimming, and you can just keep going on and on. But I mean, there's a good like 12 or so categories you can break it down to. But what happened is that over time, we started to, because we like to find ease, we like to find convenience, we like to build technology to make life easier. We started to remove movement from our day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm.
Until we're at this point now where, I could just click a button on my iPhone and get all my needs met.
Yeah.
Food delivered, my groceries delivered, I, pay all my bills, do everything.
Yeah.
I can even work from my phone. All I have to do is move my thumbs. And
Movement.
yeah, there's a little bit of movement. But the problem is, so we're living in these bodies that are, some people like to use the term evolutionary mismatch. We're in an evolutionary mismatch with the environment that we live in and the culture that we live in now. That our culture is really built for sedentarism and for being still and for convenience, but our bodies still require movement.
Sure.
To thrive, to actually be fully optimally healthy. And we have to be doing the same things that we evolved doing, at least to a certain extent. So anyway, that's a little backdrop. And so at some point in this evolution, we started to supplement our lives with exercise, Now, of course, there's always been sports, there's always been, training for big events. People have always done that since, even Greek ancient times and beyond, and before that too. But the way we think about exercise today, it's more like I'll go back to the movement diet example is we also happen to be in a culture where we are eating a lot of like processed junk foods that have very little nutrients in them.
Sure.
So what do we have to do is we have to supplement with, vitamins and minerals. And so we're taking these pills. But, and in a way, exercise can sometimes be thought of in that same sort of category. Like it's a supplement to the rest of our movement lifestyle.
Sure.
And it's not, exercise is wonderful. It's great. And it helps us build community and helps us engage in sports, and then if we're training for anything specifically, you know, it gets our bodies adapted to be able to do the adventures and goals that we want to do, etc. But you couldn't actually, so back to the diet thing, like you can't actually live off supplements alone. You know, you actually still have to eat food. So this is where the metaphor comes to a head. And so, and it's kind of the same way. You could exercise for an hour, even every day. You can exercise for an hour, but then go back and like be relatively sedentary. Like, you know, maybe your work is sedentary. You're sitting a lot. Maybe your home life is sitting. Your travel time is sitting. You know, you're in a car. It's like we're sitting for, say, the rest of the day, which could be 16 to 22 hours, depending, or sleeping for eight of those hours, probably.
Right.
Hopefully. A lot of us don't even get that. We get like 5.
True.
But so if you're only exercising for 1 hour, just to use this as an example, but then like the rest of the time is relatively not moving very much, that just sheer volume of time is always going to kind of overpower your exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're always in this battle between, you know, okay, I'm going to try to get myself healthy and then I'm going to let it go.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what I love to promote is, how do we start to bring in more movement into all the daily activities of living?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so I don't think I described this very well earlier, but you know, so exercise just becomes like, it's a category, it's a smaller circle within the larger circle of movement, which is anything that your body does that needs to change position.
Sure.
You know, we are really movement starved in so many ways, and what gets overlooked in the exercise model a lot of the time is that every single part of our body requires movement too. You know, so we do like the big motions, you know, when you're like squatting with weights, or you're running a marathon, or you're, you know, even doing a yoga class or whatever. Very often we start to neglect that even like the fingers in our hands, or the muscles in our eyes, or how we, or are we able to move all the joints in our feet, you know, those small joints, those small movements often get really neglected when we think about exercise. And they need to be fluid, they need to be mobile and strong in order to carry you. Eventually, to be able to even do your exercise well, you need to have all that fluid mobility. And so that's where I think in like daily life, you can start to focus on like the more nuanced, the more subtle things,
Sure.
you know, and try to bring more attention to your body, you know, when we're just doing normal things. Let's say, you know, even when you're watching TV, you could still move.
Yeah.
Even when you're doing the laundry, you could still find different ways to be standing or sitting.
And move.
Yeah, and move. So there's a category, this brought just jumped into my mind, with the like movement lifestyle. One technique you can do is really start to assess for yourself, what is my lifestyle like right now? And there's an interesting, what do you call it? I was going to say a schematic, or it's a acronym here to kind of find the economics of like, how are you allocating your time? And it's called sloth. I don't know if you heard about this, and it stands for, it says 5 categories of your daily life. It's sleep, leisure, occupation, travel, and health. No, sorry, not health, home. So 5 categories of where you're probably spending most of your time. And it's a real useful exercise to look at each of these categories. Sleep, how do I sleep? What position is my body in? Leisure, what do I do for leisure? Now, this is where most of us get like, we pigeonhole exercise into this one little category, which is leisure. And depending on what your work is like and your home life is like and your travel time is like and all that kind of stuff, leisure could actually be very small on a day-to-day basis. Some people are blessed with having more leisure time, and that's awesome. But a lot of us have a lot of responsibilities. And so we're always in the struggle to try to fit a little more exercise into our leisure time when we're already kind of tired or exhausted or stressed out.
Sure.
So could we spread that out into some of the other categories and look at, even at work, can you add in movements to your work, whether that's taking breaks or finding different positions to work in. Standing desks are a bit popular now, but you could also do more creative things like squatting desks or sitting on the floor, that kind of stuff. Travel, there's lots of opportunity there. We start to get blinded to the idea that there's only one way to do things, and that's a lot of times we say, okay, I have to drive my car from point A to point B. And what if you could start to think a little outside of the box and go, okay, can I ride my bike? Can I drive only part way and walk part way? Things of that nature. And then finally at home is a big one because there's a lot of responsibilities at home. And this is what I like to do in the programs when I teach people, when I coach people too, is we look at these different categories and we go, are they working towards your goals and your values and how you want to be in your health, or are they working against you?
Mm.
Yeah.
And a lot of times what we find at home is we have a huge environment that's set up to keep us sedentary. Just think, a good, a fun little acknowledgement to do for yourself is to count all the chairs or sitting places in your home, and then count how many people are actually using them.
Yeah.
A lot of times you guys have like 1 to 2 people at home and you have 15 chairs. I'm trying to, maybe that's an exaggeration, but including the couch, including all of this stuff. Most of our environments are like encouraging us to go relax, to sit, which is not bad. I mean, we want to relax, but
sure,
if the environment only gives us that option, that's what we're going to do.
Right.
So what could we do to kind of switch that up, create some more open spaces, find ways to make your home encouraging you to stand a little more, to get to the floor a little bit more. Maybe you don't put away all your exercise equipment all the time, but you keep it out a little bit so you can play with it.
Yeah.
So I did go on down a bit of a tangent there. So I hope I kind of like started to like create a little framework, a little world there. Like what's the difference between movement and exercise? And I think a lot of the crux of it is that movement is something that we're always doing. Exercise, by definition, is something that you choose to do intentionally for a specific health goal or community goal. It could be
sure,
part of your leisure and activities and fun. Also, it's very important, but there's like a much broader spectrum. We could start to like tease out how we are using our bodies the rest of the time.
Yeah, that's great, man.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't like to look funny or weird in front of other people, right? We always talk about going to the gym and being compared or comparing ourselves to other people, right? But if you think about, right out here in this environment, getting out and moving our bodies, right? Not exercising, but just moving. I see more and more videos on movement. In fact, we have a friend, Chris Rushing, who was I think our second guest. And Chris does a lot of movement, your body, your flow, everything that you're doing to keep your joints and your muscles, your tissues, your fibers, everything in motion, right? Through your exercise, whether you're just, doing and moving your body, but the importance of it and not looking, and who cares what other people are thinking, right?
Yeah.
But
Mhm,
can you
mhm.
give the listeners that are out there, including Dan and I, with regards to movement of what specifically can we do out in nature, in our backyard? Maybe we don't have a place where we can actually be in nature without having to drive somewhere. But what can we do in our backyards? What can we do in our garage? What can we do in our living room floor? But really, what can we do outside as
Yeah,
far as movement? Specific, three specific things. Name three specific things
three
for our
specific
listeners.
things.
Yeah.
Okay. Breaking it down to three is always challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I wanted to say 30.
Yes. Well, then
Divide,
you got a lot to
So,
choose from.
divide
You
that
got a
by
okay,
lot.
so but what I would say is I think it's a great question for all of us to have going on. And don't mind me going on like a quick other little tangent, is because I think what happens, you mentioned like, how we get a little bit maybe anxious, or we get caught up with looking strange or looking weird. And I think a lot of that is because we're in a cultural box. That movement, that how we hold and use our bodies has to be a certain way. And if you're to move, I mean, think of if you're standing in line at the bank and you started doing some sort of exercise, people kind of look at you. They go, "What are you doing?"
yeah,
Um, but how much of that is because you're really doing something crazy, and how much of it is just that it's not what's expected. Um, so I studied, one of the things that I studied is the MoveNat. I guess you would call it a method. And MoveNat just is a flipped around word for natural movement. The guy who started it, Oren Lacour, is French, so it's probably mouvement natural. Um, but um,
I got that.
but
yeah.
MoveNat is a great way of just kind of breaking down into the primal elements, what we evolved to do. And so it's all the primal things of like running, crawling, jumping, climbing, lifting, carrying, things of that nature. So in what I love about, say, we're going out into our backyard, and you can just ask yourself this question and get curious. And this is the antidote to asking your to feeling weird, or feeling kind of embarrassed maybe
Mhm.
about moving, is remember what it would be like to be a kid. You know, what would a kid do right now?
Yeah.
And there's a framework for anxiety, that the antidote to anxiety is curiosity. So when we get anxious, we might kind of shut down and not engage with our bodies. But if we, and I love, you have this book, Imagine If, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. That's the antidote to the anxiety. It's just like if you go into your imagination and say, oh, what if this? What if I could, how would I interact with the environment around me?
Uh-huh.
So go into your backyard and you just take a look around and go, how could I interact with that rock? How do I interact with the fence? How do I interact with the grass, the ground? And so three things you could do. I mean, just real simple things. As a kid, you can crawl. You can get on your ground and go into quadrupedal motion, hands and feet, hands and knees. Really is one of the best type of contralateral motions that we could be doing with our body to develop like coordination, core strength. It applies to our walking and our running too. Um, Crawling, you can just look at, it doesn't have to be a weight, but you can just look at, how do I lift something and carry it over there? Gardening is something you can do.
Sure.
This is where I'm bringing it back into daily life. So a lot of people like to garden, but they don't think of it as exercise. They think of it as like,
It's
oh, okay,
huge.
this is the task that I do. But you're lifting things, you're digging in the ground, you're moving your body. So I just keep going back to this. One of my favorites is just ground motion.
Mhm.
Getting on the ground and playing. Crawling, maybe laying down. You can do some simple stretches. Most of yoga is all about that. It's just,
Sure.
how do you move your body on the ground?
Yeah.
But you don't have to be doing yoga. You could simply be exploring what feels good,
Sure.
and your body will tell you. When you go into a twist, people go, oh God, oh yeah, there's that muscle. But that's your body's signal that we we might have a tendency to avoid those feelings. And there's a term called experiential avoidance. Whenever we get into something that we anticipate is going to bring us discomfort or pain, we go, okay, I'm not going to do that. You see a lot of people, even in like physical therapy situations and whatnot, they're like, okay, I can't do that because that hurts.
Yeah.
And it's valid, and you need to listen to that, but you also need to listen to, okay, but that's not the end point where you want to be. You want to start teasing your way into it. You want to start inching your way into those motions.
Yeah.
So again, I'm kind of bringing it back around. What are 3 things you can do? It's like crawling, you could lift things, and you can interact with the environment. This is where I go, okay, look, if you have a tree in your yard, can you climb that tree? If you have
we like to hug it in California.
there you go, hug it, and then maybe climb it.
They don't climb it out there, they just hug it.
There's one other difference between, let's say, the idea of movement versus exercise, but also what I loved about the natural movement perspective is that we're putting all the movements that we do, or the exercises we might do, into a context.
Sure.
Which might be, I'm not just doing pull-ups on a bar, which are great, that's good for you enough, but I'm actually building the skill of how do I climb up something if I needed to or wanted to.
Yeah.
Can I actually climb that tree?
Yeah. Interesting. So just parlaying on that a little bit, Patrick, you get out into nature a lot. You get into the rivers, you crawl, laying on the ground, kind of like interact with the environment that you're within at that point in time. How would you describe, and this is something I've been interested in and I wanted to hear you speak about this, the barefoot lifestyle for whole body health? This is something I wanted to hear you talk about, and I wanted to hear is it more so of a grounding aspect that is involved with, or is it something that I want you to explain it a little bit to everybody?
Oh yeah, it's definitely partly grounding. I love that the notion that the earth, or some people call it earthing, that the ionic charges of the earth can actually act as an anti-inflammatory for the body. It's like there's a negative ionic charge that comes from the earth and comes into your body, interacts with the positively charged free radicals, and actually acts as a bit of an anti-inflammatory. I love that notion. So that's one big reason to do it, of course. What we start to get down to is like, why would that be the case? And whatever we may have been doing in nature, as in our ancestral past, probably is something that our body needs. So if it was at the time, yes, humans have been wearing shoes for thousands of years, but if you think about the need for shoes, was really just to protect from cold and maybe sharp sharp things, like if you're actually walking on thorns, or you think about like lava rock that's like super sharp, like glass. You don't want to be walking on that barefoot very much. However, over time, our shoes actually became like a technology that is outsourcing the function of our feet into the shoe. And it actually has some consequences. And so I think of the need for at least acknowledging this and understanding that our feet are really the foundation of, and most of the movements that we do. Like, we are standing on our feet, and our feet are carrying us and holding our body weight. And there's 26 bones in the feet. There's 33 joints.
Yep. And
lots of internal musculature in the feet and extrinsic musculature that goes into other parts of the leg. And it's all supposed to be somewhat mobile, and for good reason, because when all the parts are working and functioning, One, you have better balance. You know, your body is able to orient itself over your feet. Two, you're actually getting feedback from the ground and the shape of the ground. And if your foot is able to conform to the shape of whatever you're standing on, like say you step on a Lego, or in nature you step on on a rock, on a stick, the foot actually is meant to change shape a little bit and to find your stability. And part of what it does is it sends the message to the brain of like how the foot shape has changed, and that lets the brain adjust the whole body to find its balance and its stability.
Interesting.
The problem with shoes is we cut off all that feedback. And very often with a stiff sole, with padded heels, and with tight toe boxes in the shoes, we've kind of like forced our foot into one shape, and it just stays there all day long. So now we have a foot that's not moving very well, or not moving very much. And any muscle, any joint that doesn't move very much will eventually, stiffen. It will lose the ability to move as well. But the requirement of that movement is still not, we still need to move in some way. So what we end up doing is we outsource the movement that would have been happening in our feet, and it goes up into our knees. So now we're overusing our knees a little bit, or using our hips differently. And maybe we're using our lower back differently. So getting back to nature, getting back into being more barefoot allows for that possibility that your feet can move more optimally, give you the feedback, find the stability, and even the strength in the rest of your body helps. It also helps kind of activate your hips. What was I going to say about that? I was going to say, I can go on and on about shoe shape. They know. Oh yes, yeah. So the problem is like people hear about this, and this was a backlash when like I really got into it. I grew up being barefoot a lot, but then there was a big period of time, of course, that I was wearing just conventional shoes.
Sure.
And then finally, I did get into Christopher McDougall's book on Born to Run, and it kind of inspired that thought about oh, maybe barefoot is a better way. And as soon as I started putting on those early like Vibram shoes, I noticed right away, it's like my knee pain went away, my back pain went away, my neck pain went away a little bit. I started enjoying running again. And so for me, it really, really worked. But there was a backlash in that movement where a lot of people, what they did is they like said, okay, barefoot's the only way. And they jumped into it. But then you started seeing a lot of people getting injured. And so then there was a little bit of a backlash saying like, is it really the best thing for us to be doing? And you have to kind of put it into the context of like any other sport or exercise. Being barefoot on the ground is almost like its whole other category. So people saying like, so barefoot running is not the same as shoe running. Right. And so you have to, in a way, sort of start over and go, okay, I can't just throw myself into the same activities that I would have been doing when I was shod. I have to actually train my feet and regain that mobility and flexibility before I can start increasing my, the tasks or the loads on my feet. Dancing around on this thought topic here, because otherwise I would talk all day. But so fortunately, there are a lot of great shoe companies out there right now that are making more minimalist style shoes that allow the feet to function. It's that right balance between being totally barefoot and being conventionally shod, where your feet don't move very much. And a lot of these shoes are now allowing your toes to splay, the sole of the foot to twist and bend, which gives your foot a little bit more functional capability.
Interesting.
It's the small things that shoes do that really are fascinating to me. Like, most conventional shoes have somewhat of a heel on them, even if it's like an inch padding. And I think it was a foot doctor, William Rossi, pointed out that for every inch of lift in the heel, there's a 10-degree change in the joints all the way up the body.
Wow.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong on that exact statistic, but the principle is the same, is that for as much as your heel lifts off the ground,
Sure.
the rest of your body upstream of that has to compensate in some way.
That's
So
interesting.
it really does throw off the alignment of our body.
Hmm.
And
That's why I don't wear heels.
Exactly. But look at your regular running shoes or whatever. Most of them have some lift that's higher
Absolutely.
than the toe.
Yeah.
Shoe
Yeah.
companies, came up with that as a way of helping us. The marketing is that it helps us propel us forward. It helps, avoids us hurting our heels when we strike on the ground. But unfortunately, what it does is it changes our gait.
Yes.
And we actually end up, there's an instinct, the more padding you have under your feet, and Russ, you might find this right now, like being on the sand in the beach.
Yeah.
Instinctually, reflexively, we hit the ground harder with our feet to find stability. Having lots of padding in a shoe, even though it's intended to keep us from feeling the impact of the ground, we end up hitting the ground harder because our body's trying to find its stability. It keeps smacking the ground harder. So anyway, so these are all just things to consider. It's like when you're barefoot, you allow your feet to move more flexibly and freely. It changes your proprioceptive sense of like where your body is, and you can find more balance. And for me, as also you go into the grounding earthing aspect, but for me also, anything that is closer to what feels like I'll just say it's funny, kind of like the Tarzan primal state. It just feels free, it feels more fun and activating to me.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So if I gather this correctly, what Patrick is saying to all of our listeners is sell your Nikes, sell your Hokas.
Get rid of your Brooks. Get outside barefoot.
Get outside barefoot. No,
Yes.
mainly what I'm just suggesting is start to consider, go back to that original thing we were talking about, is balance.
Yes.
Maybe you're not ready, or you're not inclined individually to want to be totally barefoot, but don't forget that the feet are such a functional and important part of your body, and it's the small motions of the feet that really do need to move. And that's going to affect your, knee pain and your back pain. And it's amazing, even just like stretching your calves can actually affect people that have chronic headaches, for example. It's like what's going on at the bottom of our body has an effect all the way up.
Yeah. The neurologic connections are unbelievable sometimes with certain things, the way it works, and the jaw affecting certain joints and things like that. Incredible some of the connections, like just tongue movements can sometimes open up certain joints. It's unbelievable sometimes.
100%. I love looking into people who are doing tongue stretches before they're like racing sprints.
Yeah.
Because of how it's affecting your pelvic floor and all the way through the core.
Exactly. It's interesting, right?
Well, I had this, I had a little over a year ago, I had this tendonitis in the outside of that went up the outside of my left leg, and it started in the ankle. So I went to physical therapy because it was, it was very, very painful.
Yeah.
And she said, basically your tendon is weak. I'm like, all right. So she says, we've got to get some of this, swelling down a little bit, which, took a couple of weeks. And she said, then we're going to start therapy. Talking about grounding, everything that we did was barefooted. Yeah. And she said, what we want to do is we need to do these simple exercises that you need to incorporate in your regular routine, 3 times a week. But everything is barefooted and one of those things that she said is, she says, I want you to stand on one foot, stand on your good foot, and I want you to just balance for 20 seconds. Right.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And then she goes, now let's go to your bad ankle, your bad foot, and let's balance. I couldn't balance. But over a period, I went twice a week, and over a period of time, then that balance improved.
Yeah.
But I did it barefoot. And the thing about it is that your shoe can do a lot of the balancing for you.
Absolutely.
To where you can't really develop that tendon or that muscle in your body. So therefore I had to stand barefooted and work on that. And now, now I do it 40 seconds, on each foot. But it's amazing what the shoe can take on rather than our barefoot.
Yeah, 100%. Like, and that's amazing to notice, and such a great way to discover that the environment we are putting our bodies in is in a way shaping and adapting our body. So our shoe is an environment that you put your body in, and your body goes, okay, this is what I need to do. And it didn't need that tendon strength within that shoe.
Yeah.
But you can even extrapolate that to, let's say, our chairs. We have all these chairs, and our body doesn't need core strength, hip strength, knee mobility, hip mobility, because you're only going to the half range of motion of your knees and your hips when you're actually sitting in a chair, for example. And people then over time realize, after many, many, many years, you just have this blindness to it. Like, what's so normal in our culture, we don't really see that there's another possibility.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hoping to help people understand, is that we can start to think a little more creatively.
Yeah.
Even look to other cultures if you need to.
Sure.
Go, okay, maybe sitting on the floor could be beneficial, because the chair might be doing the work for you that otherwise your body would have to do, without it. So balance is, and I just find that an interesting topic that we're talking about with your foot. Are we able to balance on one foot versus the other? A lot of us don't have that ability, which I find is so fascinating. Maybe it's because the shoe is happening it, but also because we have sort of adapted over time to even walking in a way that doesn't require a lot of balance. It's more of a kind of a falling forward walking gait.
Sure.
And we can retrain that. And that's what I like to, I love that the physical therapist was doing that with you, but it's something that we all can start to think about and keep testing for ourselves. Like, how do we balance on one leg?
That's good stuff.
That's awesome.
Dan the man.
Yeah. Yep. Patrick, so, you do a lot of stuff, obviously, we'll call it a bit out of the ordinary, for lack of better words. A lot of people, they don't do these certain things. They don't get into these movements, but you're also a life coach simultaneously. You do a lot of life coaching. Where would you say is the blend between the two? You do life coaching, you do movement coaching. Where do they blend together a little bit? Talk to us a little bit about that. How do you combine the two?
Yeah, there's so much in that. A lot of things led me to life coaching, but I started as a movement coach. I started as I kind of went through this whole progression of I was in movement type theater. I was an actor. I've kind of moved into being a yoga teacher for a while, and I started and eventually became a MoveNat trainer because the natural lifestyle really spoke to me a lot more.
Sure.
And what I started to notice is that, like I was talking about, was like, you can't just throw yourself into running 100 miles, barefoot if you've always been wearing shoes. I started noticing, like, even with like the bigger motions in yoga and movement, like MoveNat, that it was actually a little bit beyond most people's capabilities. And because our bodies are adapted to, let's say, and not everybody, but I'll say, like, we're adapted to a lot of chair sitting. We have shortened, hip flexors and, tightness in our back and all that kind of stuff. And so you try to get someone to do a big move, and it's like they just don't really have that mobility and flexibility. So that led me into then finding restorative exercise with Katie Bowman's work in her Nutritious Movement Institute, which really got into the nuances of things like our lifestyle and our alignment and how do we find optimal flexibility and the contractibility of the muscles, and develop a better movement patterns. And so I started working people with that way. But then what really happened, and this is where life coaching came in, is then most health and fitness professionals will recognize this common complaint of, well, we tell people what to do and they don't do it.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
Yes.
And why is that? You know, and what's the missing link there? And I became so curious about that. And that was one of my, the first pathways into life coaching, because it's taking more of a psychological approach into the things that we do. And we may know what's good for us, but a lot of us don't do that thing. And there's a lot of different reasons. It might be we find better community in the unhealthy habit, like smoking, for example. People love to smoke because they get to have a community around there.
Right.
A little less so nowadays, but it still exists. Drinking's another one there, or even just being sedentary. Our culture's around being sedentary. Well, let's go sit and eat together, which is beautiful. It's a great thing, but we can't see outside the box of like, well, we could also be together doing something active,
Yeah.
And so I started getting into like really just questioning that idea of like what is it that actually helps an individual move better, getting their own sense of motivation and willpower. And that led me into studying with the Martha Beck Institute, and becoming what they call a Wayfinder life coach. And really there, we are studying this or we are helping clients with this idea of change, going through a change cycle, learning how to take themselves from one place and moving it to another. And I find what's so cool about movement and life coaching together is we use, our life is experienced through our bodies, and our bodies experience more through movement.
Mm-hmm.
And however you move often is reflective on your life or what's going on in your life, and vice versa. What's going on in your life often reflects how you move. And you can just think of it just, on a real simplistic sense of like emotionally, if you're kind of feeling down and depressed, you're probably not going to feel like moving very much.
Right.
But if you get out and move, often the mood switches.
Yeah.
You can get out of that level of thinking,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can find solutions. There's so many great aspects to think about there. Like a big part of life coaching too is being able to sense from your body what's right for your life. And because some people call it gut sense, some people call it intuition. But it's experienced within the body, and you really know it. If there's something that is really right for you, that's in integrity for yourself, your body reacts in a certain way.
Sure.
There's something that's really against, like, that's let's say coming across your boundaries, or is just no longer serves you, your body will react in a different way. And it's usually something about like opening or closing, or feeling more free or more tension. If anybody ever follows the author physician Gabor Mate, he has this great phrase, which is wherever there's tension requires attention. And it's that idea that the body reacts. It's always reacting and trying to communicate with us.
Mm-hmm.
And it really behooves us to keep communicating with our bodies. So I love to take it into like a metaphoric, or I find there's like a few categories with life coaching to movement. One is you can notice where your own beliefs or your cultural constructs that you're tied into might be limiting the free movement of your body. Oh, I can't do that. I'm too old for that. Or people don't do that here. things like that of that nature. And you start to like break apart some of those beliefs, maybe. I'm not athletic is a big one, I've never been athletic. And can we get people to start to think about movement in a different way? Some of that is life coaching. And also the life coaching goes into noticing where it is you'd like to go. Because a lot of people, it's interesting. They come around and saying like, I just don't really know what my purpose is. What am I, maybe I don't have big goals and dreams. And that's going to include the body in a way. Like, what are you training for? What are you doing exercise for? It's hard to do exercise just for health and only just for health's sake. Itself because it's a little bit too vague. There's too much, and our psychology is such that we don't really respond very well to long-term vague goals. It's really easy to lose motivation there to say health in general is not a really great long-term goal. But if you are able to instead connect to something, goals are great, but I think what's even better is value and purpose. And values really are something that, because as opposed to a value and a goal is like, I'm going to run that marathon. Great. Okay, fine. But how many people do we know that like run a marathon and then never run again? Because they burnt out and they hated the whole experience and it was miserable for them.
Right.
I would much rather someone find a value which doesn't have an endpoint. That is, this is the type of person I want to be. There's a quality of living. So that could be in movement, like I value running because it makes me feel a certain way. Now, it doesn't have to be running, maybe that for another person, that's dance, or maybe it's yoga or Pilates or weightlifting or whatever it is, or just gardening. But connect to what it is that is really important for your life and how you want to be living your life. And then let your movement reflect that and feed into that.
Interesting.
So there's a couple things that, around life coaching and moving.
For sure.
What I value is not running. That's what I value.
Yeah, I've heard you say that before. Yeah. And I don't want to push back, but what is it about running that is aversive?
Yeah. I just don't find running fun. I just don't find it fun. And, I'm 57 and obviously people still run at 57. People still run at 70. It's how your body is. I find, like you say, I do exercise. I do the things that I do, but I find that I don't do movement in the sense of what we're describing today. I do movement in a lot of different ways that are different, that are beach oriented. And so, which is better on my body because the physical pounding, my body just doesn't like. At 57,
I hear that, and our body doesn't like that.
And so when like I was playing smash ball with my son on the grass the other day at my mom's house, and I made this comment. I said, I can feel the difference in my body reacting to being on something firm as opposed to playing smash ball on the beach where the movement of the sand, it's easier on the joints, right? And so I just, we play volleyball at my mom's house as well. And I just find playing volleyball on the grass a little bit more difficult than playing on the sand because 100%. Of the way my body reacts, right?
Taking up a lot of that impact.
Yes.
So I'm just going to throw this out there, and I'm not trying to be pushy or anything or try to force you to like anything you don't like. But I think this is a good thing that I love to do with clients too, is I go, okay, well, but what if the experience was different? Like, what if your body could learn to absorb the impact, even on in harder ground environments?
Yes.
So that it didn't react with that pain reaction.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
what if there were a different way of finding some different movement coordination, so
Right.
that you can absorb more impact. And what if running didn't have the experience of any impact at all?
Yeah.
This is the biggest difference I find between running barefoot and running with shoes. With
Mhm.
running barefoot, I hardly have any impact on my feet. I feel soft and smooth on the ground. Whereas with shoes, I tend to smack that ground harder.
Yeah.
So not saying like, okay, you have to go out running, but I'm saying, but it is interesting to say, even this is why I'm always just questioning, you know,
Yeah.
Sure.
just to get down to the heart of it,
Yeah.
Sure.
would it be different were the circumstances or the technique different?
Yep.
Yeah.
And maybe yes,
Totally
maybe
good.
no, and maybe it's like, okay, no, I'd much rather be playing beach volleyball, and I think because that's great. Beach volleyball is fun, and it requires a whole different type of musculature to play on soft ground than it
Yeah.
does on hard ground,
Right.
which I think is equally as challenging.
Oh
Right.
yeah.
Right. Especially
It
on
Yeah,
is.
surfaces like the sand and stuff like that. It's harder to move, harder to pivot, things like that.
yeah,
So that'll probably integrate more joints and integrate more muscle fibers than if flat ground and stuff like that, and vice versa, harder impact versus softer impact.
yeah, exactly.
That's
I mean, I think ideally we'd be able to be adaptable enough and be able to modify our technique enough so that we can thrive in any environment. And
yeah,
maybe a case to just kind of play around every once in a while with a little bit
Mhm.
harder, a little bit softer, different activities,
for sure. For sure.
keep
Love
things
it.
variable.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
I love it.
Patrick, a lot of people use visual representations to kind of display their ideas or their motives or their morals. Now, you have developed one yourself, I believe, known as the
Yeah,
Align Life Tree, the diagram that you've actually developed. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How that
100%
works, what
sure.
that looks like?
Yeah. Um, in the thinking, of all these topics we've talked about, a bit of an image came to mind, which serves as a framework I use in my coaching programs. And it was inspired originally by a term. This, it's appropriating an old Native American term. I believe it's an Ojibwa phrase that is, "No tree has branches foolish enough to fight amongst themselves." So no tree has branches foolish enough to fight amongst themselves. And I think a lot of the time in modern life, modern culture, we are fighting against ourselves in many ways. We have different categories and places in our life, but they're kind of at odds, and it's what we've been talking about. I might have a living environment that's not serving my health goals, or I might not be eating well, and I might have values and goals that I want to be healthier, but I'm just not doing that, or I'm not thinking in a way, or I'm holding on to maybe some limiting beliefs that are also draining away from maybe how I want to be in community and health and whatnot. And maybe our body habits are not helping us either. So what I do is I developed this idea from that tree idea of thinking about the canopy of a tree, where all the fruit and the leaves are, as kind of the end point. It's the dream, it's the vision, it's when we are flourishing in our lives.
Sure.
But what enables that canopy to flourish, and I'm not speaking as a botanist, I know there's a lot of more complexity here. This is a simplified diagram. Uh, but what enables that canopy to flourish is having like this solid trunk. And I'm thinking about where the nutrients are going. Nutrients from the ground are going up through the trunk and into that canopy. And the trunk to me represents, in order to get to that flourishing life, you need some solid sense of your values and your purpose. What is guiding you and in what direction? But below the surface of all that are the roots. And in the roots are all the little things that we do on a day-to-day basis throughout our lives And I kind of developed a diagram of 3 main categories of roots that are basically just body, mind, and lifestyle. But I talk about it as, being able to, what is it that is cultivating a resilient body that can flourish in any environment that you're in. And then there's the other root, which is mind, which I think about as how do we or I use a nice fun, I like to use little, what do you call those, where you're using the same word, the same letter in order to memorize it. Well, that didn't work for me because I didn't remember it. But but the phrase I use for the mind section, which is life coaching, is calibrating your internal compass. How do we connect with our values to know which way we want to go in our lives? How do we let go of our limiting beliefs? How do we move? How do we keep questioning, the things that are holding us back? And then there's the third section, which is our lifestyle, because if our lifestyle is not in accord with the direction we want to go, whether it's, having a fit body or just a happier life, our lifestyle is really important. And that one I think about is like curating your habitat. You need to kind of think about what's the environment that you're putting your body into. What are your habits on a day-to-day? How do you develop better habits, for your day-to-day life that are in service to those purpose and values? All of it comes in. I'm a big fan, and I study a lot of acceptance and commitment training, or for therapists, they call it acceptance and commitment therapy, but in either case, it's called ACT. And a big premise of that really aligns with this diagram that I'm talking about, which is, how do we take in our full experience of our lives, how we're thinking, how we're feeling, and be in full acceptance of that, of what's happening where you are right now, and yet still take committed action towards the values and dreams that you have.
Wow.
So I developed this
Powerful.
tree to kind of like help people kind of like look at these different categories and different subcategories and go, okay, where am I doing well? Where do I need work? And how do we start to bring everything more into better integrity?
Yeah. Yeah. Incredible.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
There's so many amazing tools that you have shared with us today. There are so many inspiring things that you've challenged with today. And I'm going to really reflect on today's conversation, because there's a lot that you stated today that are very beneficial in the everyday life,
Yeah.
And before I forget, where can people find you, Patrick? How can people follow you? What is the best way of getting a hold of you?
Oh, beautiful. I have a website, have my Instagram presence. Those are the best ways. My website is inalignedmovement.com. And my Instagram handle is at Patrick Og, which doesn't mean, the modern version of Og is different than, or OG is different than. Og is actually the root of my last name, Hogan, in the Irish Celtic. And I believe it means something. I just like link to it because it means something like noble and forever youthful.
Interesting.
And so I just felt that was a good connection. So Patrick Og. Also, I wanted to offer this to all of your listeners and audience, and to you guys as well. Is I do have an article that I put out called 6 Ways to Get Fit Without Going to the Gym.
Wonderful.
Which is kind of outlines a lot of what we were talking about today. It's just like these little ways to think about how to bring more movement into your life.
Amazing.
And so I'd love to give you guys the link to that if you
beautiful
have that in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll post it, man.
Absolutely.
Very, very cool.
Awesome. Awesome. This was an amazing conversation. I truly enjoyed this. Patrick, thank you so much for being with us today. Guys, please check us out on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. Check Patrick's website out, inalignedmovement.com, and his Instagram, Patrick OG. Guys, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you guys next
Patrick,
week.
thank you so much.
Thank you
Appreciate
so much.
it.
It's
Yeah,
such an honor
it's
and pleasure to be
fantastic.
here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right,
Thank
buddy.
you.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.